Faith becomes urgent the moment reason realizes it cannot stand alone. Welcome to another story in the series From Wonder to Power, The Journey of Thought. Today I want to show you how Anselm of Canterbury transforms belief into a disciplined search for understanding, and how philosophy returns to theology not as submission, but as method. The medieval world does not begin with doubt. It begins with trust. Truth is received through revelation, preserved by tradition, and lived through ritual. Yet, as intellectual life slowly reorganizes itself, a tension emerges. If faith already holds truth, what role remains for reason? To question belief risks disobedience. To refuse inquiry risks stagnation. Anselm enters at this fragile point. He does not seek to replace faith with argument. He seeks to deepen faith through thought. Belief, he claims, is not complete until it understands what it affirms. Reason becomes a servant, but also a test. It must clarify, not undermine. It must reveal coherence where mystery once stood unquestioned. This episode marks the first scholastic turn. Philosophy no longer stands outside theology, nor simply beneath it. Instead, it becomes a tool for structuring belief itself. Here, wonder does not disappear. It is reorganized into order, and order begins to shape the intellectual authority that will guide medieval Europe for centuries. Morning mist lingers over the cloister gardens at Bec, softening stone and quieting the world enough for thought to be heard. Brother Osborne walks beside Anselm after prayers, holding wax tablets and a question that refuses to fade. If faith is true, why does it still tremble before doubt and argument? Many treat questioning as weakness, something to be silenced quickly. Anselm treats it differently. He recognizes in it a sign that belief is alive, not broken, you know. In this monastery, faith orders the rhythm of every hour. It shapes the will, disciplines the body, and defines purpose. Yet Anselm insists that faith also awakens the intellect. Belief does not end thinking. It demands it. God is not honored by a sleeping mind. Devotion requires attention. It requires the courage to seek clarity where comfort might prefer silence. Osborne senses that this is not curiosity for its own sake. It is loyalty expressed as understanding. Anselm teaches that one does not first understand and then believe. One believes and therefore seeks understanding. Faith creates pressure inside the mind, a need for coherence. If God is truth itself, then the believer cannot live content with contradiction. Doubt is not overcome by authority alone. It is answered by structure, by reasoning that aligns the intellect with what the soul already confesses. As this method spreads, the tone of religious life shifts. Prayer and reasoning no longer stand apart. After chanting psalms, Anselm returns to argument without feeling he has crossed into another world. The same humility governs both acts. Faith restrains pride. Reason restrains superstition. The monastery becomes a place where devotion trains thought, and thought purifies devotion. From above, a new movement begins to take shape. Christianity learns to speak in arguments as well as hymns. Faith remains primary, but it refuses to remain silent. As the mist lifts and labour begins, Osborne sets down his tablets with a new sense of obedience. It is not only submission of the will, it is the willingness to think honestly under the gaze of God. After Compline, when the monastery settles into its most honest quiet, Anselm remains at his desk. The candles burn low, by choice, not neglect. Too much light distracts. Thought, he believes, requires a kind of humility in its surroundings. Some brothers worry that argument invites pride, that reasoning about God risks placing the mind above obedience. Anselm understands the fear. He simply refuses its conclusion well. For him, reason is not raised against faith like a weapon, it is offered back as devotion. To think carefully about God is to refuse to treat belief as casual or careless. The intellect, like the will, must be disciplined and returned to its source. Neglecting reason, he insists, is not humility, it is sloth disguised as reverence. If God is truly the highest good, confusion preserved by choice cannot honor him. This conviction changes how questions are received. When difficulty appears, Anselm does not silence it with authority. He stays with it. Clarity, he believes, is more faithful than evasion. Reasoning becomes a form of prayer, patient and structured. Each step follows necessity rather than impulse. The mind submits to order instead of asserting mastery. Obedience here is not passivity, it is discipline shaped by trust. He also draws a careful line between questioning and rebellion. Rebellion replaces God with the self. Reason, rightly used, acknowledges dependence by seeking coherence beyond preference. The believer does not reason to judge God, but to align thought with what faith already affirms. Understanding is not demanded as proof, it is pursued as expression. From above, a quiet shift takes form. Theology begins to recognize rational structure as a legitimate act of piety. Argument loses its automatic suspicion. The intellect is invited into devotion rather than excluded from it. Faith deepens by refusing to separate love of God from love of truth. When Anselm finally extinguishes the candles, nothing dramatic ends the labor. Mystery remains, yet something essential has occurred. Reason has stayed obedient without becoming silent. Faith has remained sovereign without becoming afraid. Rain taps steadily on the monastery roof, enclosing the world in a quiet rhythm. Brother Martin sits in the scriptorium, watching Anselm write with a care that makes each line feel earned. Some expect a defense against critics, an argument meant to win. What appears instead feels different. It is not directed outward, it is aimed at the mind itself, right? Anselm begins with a single idea held as cautiously as a flame. God is that than which nothing greater can be conceived. He does not start with the world, with motion, cause, or evidence. He starts with meaning, with what the mind already commits to when it speaks the word God with seriousness. The argument unfolds not like a courtroom case, but like an experiment conducted inside thought. He presses the intellect to follow its own implications without escape. If the greatest conceivable being exists only in thought, then something greater could be conceived. That same being existing in reality. Yet the definition resists this. The mind finds itself cornered not by force, but by its own consistency. Martin feels logic tightening, not around God, but around the act of thinking itself. The argument exposes what thought risks when it claims to think the divine at all. Anselm does not treat this as conquest. He does not imagine that a syllogism captures God. The method aims to purify the mind, not imprison the divine. It pushes thinking to its limit, where honesty must replace evasion. Some questions, he suggests, are not solved by gathering more facts, but by clarifying what is already meant. Martin senses why this provokes unease. The reasoning feels too clean, too internal, detached from the world's disorder. Yet this is its purpose. It becomes a spiritual exercise in rational form, forcing the intellect to see itself clearly. The result is not prideful certainty, but disciplined clarity. Seen from above, this marks a decisive scholastic shift. Theology adopts logical rigor not to end mystery, but to approach it with integrity. Thought stretches until it reaches what it cannot control. In that stretching, reason becomes devotion's instrument rather than its rival. As rain continues and candles fade, Martin returns to his work with a quieter mind, trained not to defeat doubt, but to face it without flinching. The bell for study sounds, and the brothers enter the room with boards and styluses in hand. Images of saints still hang on the walls, familiar and reassuring, but Anselm's attention moves somewhere less visible. He asks them to set stories aside for a moment, not because they deceive, but because they do not yet provide the precision he seeks. Today, devotion must take a different form. He insists that God must be approached where meaning becomes sharpest, not in the flow of myth or the warmth of narrative, but in the structure of thought itself. When theology rests only on story, belief may survive, but clarity weakens. Logic, he explains, becomes the grammar of reverence, you know. It disciplines the mind that speaks about the divine, ensuring that devotion does not dissolve into comforting vagueness. This shift unsettles many. Myth reassures, logic exposes. It demands definition, tests coherence, and refuses contradiction. Anselm accepts the risk because he trusts the source. If God is truth, then the tools of truth cannot be enemies. To allow God to enter logic is not to confine him, it is to make human speech about him accountable. Theology must accept structure if it is to avoid arbitrariness. The effect in the classroom is immediate. Questions are no longer settled by authority alone. Arguments must stand on their own, premises must be named, conclusions must follow. Faith is not diminished by this discipline, it becomes clearer. Students discover that belief can be examined without being threatened, and that mystery can endure precision without retreating into obscurity. Seen from above, a turning point emerges. Theology steps fully into rational space. God is addressed not only through symbol and story, but through necessity and coherence. This does not replace liturgy or scripture, it gives them form. Thought itself becomes a field of worship. As the brothers return to their work, something irreversible has occurred. God has not been reduced. Human speech about God has been made more careful. By the end of this chapter, faith no longer appears as a shelter from thinking. It becomes the force that drives thought to its most disciplined edge. What Anselm gains is a new equilibrium. Belief and reason no longer stand as rivals, but as partners in a shared search for coherence. Theology adopts structure without surrendering mystery. Devotion acquires intellectual form. In this movement, wonder does not vanish. It hardens into order, and order begins to shape the intellectual authority that will guide medieval Europe for centuries. Faith learns to speak in arguments as well as in prayer. What is lost is a certain simplicity. Once belief accepts rational scrutiny, it can no longer rely solely on inherited certainty. Questions multiply. Authority must justify itself. The mind, once awakened, refuses to return entirely to silence. This is the price of clarity. Truth becomes more stable, yet also more demanding. Faith is strengthened, but it is no longer effortless. This marks the first decisive scholastic turn. Theology steps into rational space not as surrender, but as maturation. Philosophy re-enters religious life as method rather than threat. The medieval world begins to organize its inner life with the same discipline it applies to law, learning, and governance. Power slowly follows structure. In the next chapter, this disciplined search takes on a sharper edge. With Abelard, disagreement itself becomes a tool of understanding. Truth is no longer approached only through harmony, but through structured conflict. Scholasticism begins to resemble a machine, one that produces clarity through dispute rather than contemplation. If this series has sparked your interest and you wish to delve deeper into the topics discussed, I invite you to the source from which it originates. This book takes you on a journey from the 7 sages of antiquity through the modern revolution with Kant and Hegel to the contemporary philosophical dilemmas of the 20th and 21st centuries. In the book, you will find significantly more details than I could present in the film, as well as space for your own reflection at your own pace. It is this very book that forms the foundation of the entire series you are watching. If you wish to explore the history of philosophy in its full version, get it on Amazon. The link is in the description of this video.